Hey guys, welcome to tonight's cozy saga, the entire story of Norse mythology, served at the speed of a Sunday nap after assembling furniture with an Allen key and blind optimism. We're going someplace colder than your office AC in July, warmer than the laptop on your thighs, and just weird enough to make your group chat feel normal. Expect a cosmic cow that licks people into existence, a world serpent that doubles as the planet's belt, and a thunder god who travels by goat, because Uber surge pricing is eternal. This is bedtime for grown-ups with squeaky knees, inboxes older than some houseplants, and a sleep tracker that keeps sending you performance reviews. We'll glide from the universe's loading screen to a tree so big it makes your ficus feel like garnish, pausing only for mead, runes, and the occasional existential wolf. The jokes will be dad level, the pacing will be spa level, and you are officially off duty from remembering anyone's birthday or the streaming password you swore you'd write down. If this helps you drift off, tap like, subscribe, and drop a comment about your favourite Norse moment or the exact minute you fell asleep. But only if you actually enjoy this. No pressure. The algorithm can wait, your eyelids can't. Now, dim the lights, set your fan to gentle Arctic tundra. Slide the phone onto Do Not Disturb like it's a tiny sleeping baby. Loosen your jaw, let your shoulders melt, adjust your blanket until it feels like a contract with comfort. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. Good. Tonight, we'll mosey through Ginnunga Gap, meet a very determined cow, climb Yggdrasil without breaking a sweat, borrow some poetry from a locked cabinet, and tiptoe toward Ragnarok, a cosmic, hard reset that somehow ends with morning. You don't have to keep up. If sleep taps you on the shoulder, let it lead. The gods will keep talking quietly while you head off to dream of warm fjords, clinking mead cups, and a to-do list that simply dissolves like mist. In the hush before anything had the decency to exist, there was Ginnunga Gap, a cosmic loading screen with no progress bar. On one side, icy Niflheim breathed freezer-burned air. On the other, Muspelheim crackled like a barbecue that forgot its off switch. In the middle, absolute silence, like a group chat after someone says, "We should do a reunion." Let your shoulders drop as creation yawns awake, not with a bang, but with a politely awkward, "Oh, hello." Imagine the universe holding its breath for so long it forgot why it started. There were no clocks to be late for, no meetings, no traffic, no notifications, just a soft, airy nothing that felt somehow freshly vacuumed. If you have ever walked into a room and forgotten your purpose, you have already visited Ginnunga Gap, briefly wearing slippers. Inhale slowly and let that pristine blankness rinse through your thoughts like cool water through a clean glass. To the frost side, Niflheim, murmured with mists and ancient cold, the kind that sneaks into your socks and files a complaint with your toes. Its rivers curled like silver cords, taking their time, because time was not yet a thing that scolded anyone. Each icy breath was crisp as new linen, as if winter had an HR department and was very proud of its standards. Picture the air so clear you could hear a snowflake change its mind. To the fireside, Muspelheim did not whisper. It crackled, stretched, and flexed like a furnace doing yoga. Sparks leapt up and never fell because there was nowhere to land, only a red-gold glow like the back of your eyelids when sunlight finds you. There lived embers with opinions and flames with personality, all warmth and improv, the original open mic for light. Feel that distant heat, not as a scorch, but as a lazy cat on your lap, heavy and content. Between those extremes was the polite, patient middle, where nothing hurried because nothing had anywhere to be. The gap was a waiting room, stocked with only one magazine called Eternity, featuring the same article on 10 ways to organize your infinite void every month. You could sit there forever and not miss anything, because missing requires a schedule. Breathe in for 4, out for 6, and let your jaw unclench like Velcro in slow motion. Then something almost happened. Frost crept just close enough to feel the heat's curiosity. Warmth reached just far enough to hear the ice's careful breathing. No alarms went off. The thermostat did not throw a tantrum. Instead, the edges noticed each other the way old neighbours do at the mailbox. A nod, a shared weather report, a promise that this will be quick. Between them, The tiniest drizzle formed, a melody made of melt. Those first drips were not water the way your sink knows it. They were possibility turned liquid, patient as tea steeping in a universe-sized mug. Each drop carried a secret ingredient list, a pinch of hush, a bite of brightness, a long exhale of what if. They gathered in the hollow places like thoughts in a quiet mind, and the gap, which had always been fine with nothing, found itself strangely delighted by something. The air learned how to be a little heavier without feeling crowded. The silence learned harmony, a soft duet between cold and flame. The melt pooled like a small, polite puddle at the centre of an empty stage, and the spotlight, if there had been one, would have shrugged and shone. You know that moment when sleep sneaks up, feathers itself around your shoulders and says, "We're doing this." The gap felt that. There was no drum roll, but there was a sense that if someone had a drum, they would have rolled it gently. Frost exhaled. Fire sighed. The puddle shivered the way a new idea does in your head, right before you say it out loud. The glow from Muspelheim kissed the mist from Niflheim, and the kiss lingered. The temperature landed at brisk cardigan, cosmically speaking. Now the melt began to thicken, like a stew left to think about its choices. Shapes hinted at themselves and then pretended not to. A ripple became a shoulder, then a shrug, then the suggestion of something big trying to remember its name. The gap leaned in. Even nothingness loves a reveal. If you listen closely, you can hear the universe clear its throat. Before we name what rose, savor the last seconds of absolute ambiguity. This is the best part of any story, when everything is still possible and nothing has embarrassed itself yet. Let your eyes sink heavier, as if your lashes are agreeing with gravity for once. The ice will not rush you, the fire will not hurry you. The middle is a couch that fits you perfectly. And there, in that careful cradle of hush and warmth, the first life began to gather its courage, the way a yawn gathers your whole face. A shape drew itself out of the melt, large and drowsy, the original, "I woke up like this." On the sidelines of destiny, a cosmic cow licked her lips in a foreshadowy way, but she will have her moment soon. For now, rest in the cradle and feel the room of the world getting ready to welcome its first footsteps. From that frosty sizzle came Ymir, an accidental giant with the energy of a nap you didn't plan, and Audumla, the cosmic cow who kindly handled catering. She licked salty rhinestones like a patient toddler, and out of those licks emerged the first godly ancestor. It's the sort of origin story that suggests the universe was invented by people who respect snacks. Breathe in and let the strangeness feel oddly sensible. Ymir arrived from the melt where Niflheim's rime met Muspelheim's heat, condensing out of possibility like dew collecting its courage on a window at dawn. He did not burst onto the scene so much as gather, a being-sized shrug that said, "Yes, this will do." And for a first creature that was already impressive. Think of him as the prototype that unexpectedly became the product line. Audumla appeared with the calm practicality of breakfast, 4 rivers of milk flowing from her like a gentle policy on sustenance. No one goes unfed at the beginning of everything. Ymir drank deeply and settled into his role as the universe's first customer, nourished and enormous, like rain deciding to be a lake for a while. Her presence made the void feel less like a waiting room and more like a nursery. Meanwhile, the cow's menu was minimalist and miraculous. She licked the salty rhinestones, unhurried, like a craftsman who measures twice and cuts never. Day by patient day, the ice gave up a secret person in stages. First hair, then head, then an entire figure named Buri, ancestor of the gods. It was genealogy by gentle exfoliation, and somehow that makes perfect sense here. While the cow freed ancestry from ice, Ymir, being primordial and peculiar, generated offspring in sleep and sweat, with new giants sprouting from armpits and the meeting of his legs like rumours that got ambitious. This was not a family tree so much as a bramble, the frost giants multiplying with the confident chaos of myth itself. Creation, apparently, is comfortable with methods that make HR nervous. Buri's line moved differently. Buri begat Bor, and Bor wed Bestla of the giants, a union that would lead to Odin, Vili and Ve, the brothers who would remodel the void with dramatic flair. From careful patience and interfamily alliances, a new branch of decision-makers readied their toolkits of wisdom, will, and a surprising tolerance for cosmic heavy lifting. But here in the earliest hush, the spotlight still belongs to the giant and the cow. Picture Odumla's steady breath fogging the newborn chill as her milk traced pale rivers across unclaimed ground, kindness flowing before laws and calendars. In that softness, emptiness learned to host, and even the cold seemed to unclench its jaw. Care is the first magic here, and it hums quietly. Ymir drank until the four rivers felt like lullabies, and the lullabies felt like a promise that tomorrow could arrive without a fight. He was vast and drowsy, the original nap in progress, teaching the void that stillness can be productive when it's busy becoming a story. Comfort learned Ymir's outline, which is quite an achievement for comfort. Back at the Salt Lick, introductions continued in increments because some arrivals need ceremony, hair, head, whole person, then lineage stepping forward like a well-timed cue. Buri stood complete, a reminder that warmth plus patience can pull futures out of ice like letters from an envelope. No speeches yet, presence was eloquent enough. If the strangeness makes you smile, let it. Myth often tells truths in sideways shapes, and this one says nourishment comes first, then names, then plans. Here, milk is a river and stone is a door, a giant is a cradle for descendants, and a cow is the gentle hinge that swings the story open. Everything important is already underway, and nothing is in a hurry. Soon the gods from Buri's line will lift their eyes to a ceiling they intend to build, and a shoreline they intend to draw, and Ymir's vastness will become geography and weather, and the borders of a world. But for now, linger where breakfast is endless and ancestry arrives by degrees, where survival is an art taught by a cow with perfect timing. The giant rests, the cow continues, and the next chapter waits politely at the edge of the light. Then came Odin and his brothers, the original DIY without instructions crew. With Ymir's remains, they crafted oceans, mountains, and the sky, like setting up a home theatre, but with more fjords. Earth became Midgard, a comfortable middle seat between chaos and customer service. Exhale as the scaffolding of a universe clicks into place. They began with the biggest job on the list, slaying Ymir, whose vast body immediately became the raw materials aisle of existence, because nothing says starter home like a giant-sized supply run. From his blood they poured the oceans, from his flesh they shaped the land, from his bones the mountains rose like stubborn thoughts refusing to sit down. His hair softened into forests, and the ribs of the world finally had leaves to tickle them. Then came the ceiling, because every good room needs one. The brothers lifted Ymir's skull and arched it overhead, a dome that turned the void into an address. They fetched sparks from Muspelheim, flinging them upward like glitter that learned choreography, arranging stars to glide on patient tracks through the night. Some lights wandered on courses. Some held still like pins in the map of forever, a slow, steady clock you don't have to wind. Clouds were the last bit of brainwork, literally, so they fluffed the sky with Ymir's brains, which sounds rude but reads as weather, and suddenly shade had a personality. The winds began to practice their inside voices, and the rain rehearsed polite conversations with the soil. The world learned to breathe through scheduled showers and occasional drama. About those neighbours. The Jötnar needed a shoreline and a boundary, because even myth benefits from a fence and a friendly wave across it. So the brothers stacked Ymir's eyebrows into a fortification and named the safe Middle Midgard, an embrace designed for humans not yet sculpted, but definitely expected. It was less a wall than a promise. Life would have room to be tender and brave without tripping over giants every Tuesday. With the major remodel done, they walked a beach that had only just learned what beach meant, and found two pieces of driftwood quietly minding their business. They shaped a man from ash and a woman from elm, or something elm adjacent, and called them Ask and Embla, because even beginnings need names to stick the landing. Gifts followed like housewarming presents. Odin gave breath and spirit, Vili gave understanding and movement, and Ve offered speech, sight, and hearing, so the world could be named out loud. Ask blinked, Embla listened. both stepped into the middle seat of Midgard, where the light was kind and the to-do list small. Wake, learn, love, repeat. Language draped itself over things like soft labels, and suddenly sea and stone and home started answering when called. Humans had arrived, and the silence made space for laughter without losing its calm. The brothers weren't done with architecture. They made a high city for themselves called Asgard, because even divine contractors need an office with decent views and a good coffee situation. Bridges would come later, and neighbours would eventually complain, but for now the blueprint felt balanced, like a table that finally stops wobbling after one last shim. Day and night learned there. Roots and time stopped pacing and started strolling. If this sounds like an aggressive IKEA trip, that's fair, except the instructions were written in stars, and the Allen key was willpower, wit, and a willingness to try again. Odin, Vili, and Ve are a collaboration that reads like a sentence. Spirit, sense, and shape moving in the same direction without stepping on each other's lines. Their teamwork is the quiet engine under the floorboards of the world. Now let your eyelids dim with the sky, knowing the ceiling is sturdy and the oceans are set to a soothing simmer, not a boil. Midgard hums in the middle, a safe seat reserved for soft hearts and curious hands, while above, sparks keep their patient rhythms like a lullaby with good timing. The brothers step back from their workbench, nod once, and let the new world exhale into its own gentle night. At the centre stands Yggdrasil, a world tree so vast it makes your tallest houseplant feel like a garnish. Its roots twist into realms of frost, flame, and corporate-class mystery, while its branches shelter gods, mortals, and a squirrel who really loves drama. Each realm hums like a different playlist, all threaded on one living spine. Settle in as we wander its rings like quiet hallways at night. Picture an ash whose trunk is the cosmic spine, with three mightiest roots reaching where maps get shy. One to the well of Urd in the heavens, one to Mimir's well among giants, and one to Vergelmir in the cold beneath all things. Around this pillar the 9 realms array themselves like rooms off a central stair, each with its own lighting, sound design, and guest list, all dependent on the tree's steady heartbeat. When Yggdrasil trembles, everyone checks the calendar for ominous events, because that shake is the early knock of Ragnarok. At the Well of Urd, 3 Norns, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, tend fate like meticulous gardeners, ladling water and white clay over the bark, so the tree doesn't wither while destiny keeps its appointments. They carve what must be into what will be, and even the gods show up respectfully early to hear how the day plans to go. It's not bureaucracy. It's choreography written in water and runes. Under another root lies Mimisbrunna, the well of wisdom where Mimir keeps counsel so deep it echoes, and where Odin traded an eye for a drink strong enough to see past tomorrow's weather. Knowledge pools there like midnight tea, steeped in memory and patience, and the tree drinks some of that clarity through its root the way a mind absorbs a good silence. Far below, Vergelmir gurgles in Niflheim, a primal source feeding countless rivers that remember the taste of the first cold. Of course, a tree so central hosts a lively ecosystem, equal parts majestic and mischievous. Nidurga gnaws at the roots like an overcommitted dental plan, while an eagle keeps solemn watch in the high boughs. Between them scampers Ratatoska, a gossip squirrel sprinting up and down the trunk delivering insults and updates with the job satisfaction of a barista with the tea and the receipts. 4 stags nibble the leaves, and sugary dew, honeydew, falls like the cosmos's own simple syrup for bees to turn into breakfast. Now stroll the 9 realms gently by name, like reading door plates in a quiet corridor at dusk. Asgard, the god's bright stronghold. Midgard, the human middle seat. Vanaheim, where older earthwise powers breathe. Alfheim glows like dawn on snow, while Jotunheim keeps its mountains tall and its tempers taller, content to be spectacularly inconvenient on principle. Nidavellir, or Svartalfheim depending who's labelling the drawers, rings with dwarven hammers, and Niflheim and Muspelheim chill and blaze at opposite ends of the thermostat, with Helheim keeping rooms for stories that finish the usual way. The gods assemble at Yggdrasil like a daily town hall, a habit that says show up, listen, decide, and the tree abides it all with the patience of furniture built to outlast arguments. Beneath, the serpents wriggle their private ballet. Above, wings stir the bright air, and in between, Ratatoska never misses a cardio day. Even stillness here feels like motion that respects your need for quiet. Yggdrasil's name whispers its own story. Odin's horse, the gallows he rode when he hung for 9 nights to win the runes, the tree bearing the terrible one like a mount, carries a rider through storm into understanding. Every groan in its grain remembers that sacrifice, proof that meaning isn't handed out, it's carved, learned and paid for with attention. So the bark keeps secrets, and the leaves keep time. Sometimes the canopy hosts omens. A rooster's crow rehearses the note that will one day wake the last morning before the long night, and the branches shiver like a harp touched by a careful hand. Yet even prophecies feel far away when the Norns water the roots and the wells do their quiet work, and bees gather sweetness from the tree's gentle rain. Continuity is a lullaby the cosmos hums to itself here. In certain tellings, when fire and frost finish their feud, Yggdrasil shelters what must survive so mornings can be relearned, names relearned, and kindness relearned under green light. The tree is a bridge but also a refuge, a map but also a room with comfortable chairs and long sight lines. If the worlds begin again, they will still need shade and a centre. For now, walk the rings in your mind, soft-footed and unhurried, touching railings polished by ages of hands that argued loudly, and loved loudly, and then fell quiet. Let each realm's playlist fade into the next until they braid into one low, steady chord held by roots that know their work. When you're ready, set the squirrel's gossip to mute, the dragon's gnawing to white noise, and rest in the cool green hush of the middle of everything. 2 godly families, Aesir and Vanir, disagreed like relatives at a holiday dinner, loud, impressive, and eventually resolved with gifts. They traded hostages, wisdom, and one very influential spit puddle that became Kvasir, the smartest being alive. Think of it as ancient merger and acquisition, but with more poetry and fewer spreadsheets. Let the tension melt into a handshake across the ages. It started with a visitor named Gulveig, whose shimmer around gold and talent for cider made the Aesir feel like someone had brought a casino into the living room and rearranged the furniture of their morals. They tried to end her 3 times by fire, but she returned as Haida, which is the mythic equivalent of "you can't uninstall this app," and the Vanir took that personally. Lines were drawn, magic flexed, and the first war in the world stretched its back. The Aesir fought like blacksmiths with a calendar, steel, storm, and schedule, while the Vanir answered with subtler measures of foresight and fertility magic that turned battlefields into complicated gardens. Walls fell, fields suffered, and the noise went on long enough for everyone to realize that no one was winning and everyone was exhausted, which is very on brand for wars and family meetings alike. In the end, parity felt heavier than victory, and both sides paused at the edge of their breath. Peace talks arrived like tea after a long argument, and with them came the exchange. Njord, Freyr, and Freyja left Vanaheim for Asgard, while Honir and the wise Mimir went the other way to keep the ledgers balanced. The gesture wasn't just politics. It was a promise that doors would stay open and advice would be shared, even if the seating chart felt awkward for a while. Everyone nodded as if this sort of thing happened all the time, which in myths it does. Freyja brought cider to Asgard like a masterclass, and even Odin, who collects wisdom like other people collect cable subscriptions, leaned in with real curiosity. Cider bent probability, braided fate, and turned what if into a tool instead of an accident, and the Aesir added it to their toolbox next to thunder and good posture. Culture shock melted into skill sharing, the friendliest form of truce. Meanwhile, the Vanir discovered that Honir looked terrific in a leadership role until he had to make a decision without Mimir whispering advice, at which point he turned into a decorative coat rack with opinions. Feeling swindled, they beheaded Mimir and mailed the head back like a very rude invoice, and Odin, who knows a good resource when he sees one, preserved it with magic so council could continue. It was grim, clever, and very efficient, the Norse trifecta. To seal the peace, both sides spit into a great vessel, as if making a sourdough starter for wisdom, and from that mingled essence arose Kvasir, who could answer any question without sounding smug. A true miracle. He became the walking embodiment of "we're better together," proof that cooperation can brew a mind sharp enough to cut new paths through old forests. The spit was gross. The symbolism was gorgeous. Results may vary. Kvasir travelled, listened, and solved problems so smoothly that even riddles felt appreciated, like cats that had finally chosen a favourite human. He was a truce with legs, a reminder that the best treaties aren't just signed, they're lived, visited, and encouraged to learn new languages along the way. Peace, it turns out, likes to keep busy. In time, the two families functioned less like rivals and more like departments sharing a coffee machine, with the Aesir leaning wallward and the Vanir keeping harvest honest and hearts unknotted. Asgard made room at the table, Vanaheim kept its dignity, and the calendar began to prefer festivals over sieges, which is good for sleep and storytelling. This is not absence of tension, it's tension on a leash. If a lesson lives here, it's that strength without foresight stumbles, and foresight without strength hesitates, but together they walk like a matched set of comfortable shoes. By trading people, practices, and pride, the gods converted conflict into culture, which is the most grown-up magic of all. Some afternoons still bristled, but mornings felt possible again. As for that influential spit puddle, its legacy winds forward into poetry and peril, because knowledge rarely sits quietly on a shelf in this cosmos. Kvasir's story will take a turn, but tonight he remains what he first was, the calm voice after thunder, born from two crowds who finally chose conversation over volume. Let the drums of war fade to the hush of shared work, and sleep where treaties hold like good knots. So breathe out the last of the shouting and into the easy cadence of cooperation, where even old grudges get up for a stretch and consider retirement. The Aesir and Vanir learned to call each other by their better names, and the world was sturdier for it, like a bridge that stops wobbling once both sides agree on the rhythm. Settle back. Tomorrow's stories are easier to hear when tonight is quiet. Deep underground, dwarves hammered star metal into legendary gear, Mjolnir, Gungnir, and other items you absolutely cannot buy online. Sparks flew like unruly fireflies, and every clang stitched magic into metal. Their workshop was equal parts innovation lab and grumpy artisan market. Listen for the rhythm. Tap, tap, hush. Marvel takes shape. The caverns glowed like a hearth turned inside out, bellows sighing in steady breaths, while anvils kept time with the patience of old clocks. Helmets bobbed, beards braided like cables, and soot sketched proud maps across foreheads that had never once overcomplicated a blueprint. If you've ever fixed a wobbly chair at 10 p.m. and felt noble, you have a tiny diploma from this school of excellence. Tap, tap, hush. One more layer of wonder. First came the sons of Ivaldi, masters who treated perfection like a modest habit, not a dramatic pose. At Loki's not entirely innocent request, they spun new golden hair for Sif, so flawless it rooted to her scalp and grew like she'd simply scheduled an upgrade. While the hair shimmered, they set to work on Gungnir, the spear that never missed, and Skidbladnir, a ship that could fold into a pocket like a well-behaved picnic blanket. Tap, tap, hush. Precision, with a wink. Then the bet that launched 1,000 sparks. Loki wagered his very head that Broker and Sindri, call him Eitri on formal occasions, couldn't outforge the Ivaldi crew. The brothers nodded, vanished into furnace light, and fed the fire with a kind of love only artisans and grandmothers understand. Loki tried sabotage as a buzzing fly with commitment issues, but the hammer fell true anyway, mostly. Tap, tap, hush. The handle ended short. Destiny did not. Out of that crucible came Mjolnir, Thor's thunder condensed into a handheld promise, forged so hot the edges hummed with weather. The handle was shorter than planned thanks to certain insect-related theatrics, which suited Thor's throwing arm and comedic timing. Also from those forges, Draupnir, Odin's ring that quietly made 8 perfect copies every 9 nights, like abundance on a schedule. Tap, tap, hush, wealth without bragging, and because every pantheon needs efficient transportation, they birthed Gullinbursti, the golden-bristled boar whose glow cut through fog like a lighthouse with excellent cardio. With bristles bright as sunrise and hooves that didn't believe in detours, it carried Freya where maps felt shy. Meanwhile, Skidbladnir unfolded to seat a crowd, then snapped small again like a polite secret. Tap, tap, hush. Form meets function, flirts with flair. Not all masterpieces were noise and glitter. When a wolf named Fenrir required a promise strong enough to hold a prophecy, dwarves wove Gleipnir, a ribbon smooth as evening and tougher than any chain. It was spun from impossible fibres: cat's footfall, woman's beard, mountain's root, bear's sinew, fish's breath, bird's spittle. Materials you can't buy because you can't even find them on a good day. Tap, tap, hush. Silk that could outthink teeth. Gungnir's point was etched with quiet rules the world agreed to follow, its balance so true even wind stopped fidgeting when it flew. Draupnir's measured generosity reminded kings and warriors alike that enough can arrive gently, without fanfare. The best enchantments felt like good manners made permanent. Tap, tap, hush, etiquette in iron. Dwarves moved through halls named for what they loved: Nidavellir, Svartalfheim, places where stone remembers every footstep and ore listens before it answers. 4 sturdy names: Ostri, Vestri, Nordri, Sudri, held up the sky's corners like stagehands who know when not to be seen. They preferred contracts to compliments and invoices to epics, but they could do poetry when the metal asked. Tap, tap, hush. Craft first, credit later. There were cautionary glints too, Andvari's gold, rich with a curse, a reminder that treasure amplifies whatever lives in the hand that holds it. Beauty can be faithful or feral depending on the bargain you make. The dwarves didn't judge, they just stamped the work and sent it up the lift. Tap, tap, hush. Choose wisely, polish kindly. Their philosophy was simple and stubborn. Measure twice, enchant once, and leave no edge without a purpose. If something could fold, it should. If something could return to the hand that loved it, it must. They forged tools that calmed chaos rather than fed it. Tap, tap, hush. Utility wearing evening clothes. So let the anvil's lullaby settle your shoulders while the last sparks drift down like tiny, retired comets. Picture Mjolnir cooling on a stone slab, Gungnir resting point down like a pen that has finished its sentence, and Gleipnir coiled like a silk thought. The forge is dim, the bellows sigh one final time, and in the soft red afterglow Marvel curls up and sleeps. Tap, tap, hush. Dreams take shape. Wisdom has a price, and Odin paid it with one eye, slipping it into Mimir's well like a coin in a cosmic vending machine. He drank knowledge that tasted like grief, patience, and 1,000 careful decisions. Depth replaced depth perception, and he saw further than distance. Close your eyes and feel the cool, steady weight of foresight. The path to Mimir's well threads beneath a root of Yggdrasil that reaches into the realm of giants, where the air feels older than opinions, and the water remembers everything it's touched. This is a quiet corner of the cosmos, a place for questions that don't like crowds and answers that speak in low voices. Here, the surface of the well looks still until you notice the reflections moving before the faces do. Mimir keeps watch, the rememberer, whose reputation for deep counsel comes not from speeches but from sips, each draught a page from a book that never ends. He drinks daily from the well, and wisdom rises to meet him like steam from a winter cup, a routine that makes brilliance look like good hydration with better habits. Even the roots seem to lean in when Mimir thinks, which is often, and never rushed. Odin arrived with the gravity of someone who has tried every other door, asking for one drink and offering something that would prove he meant it. Mimir named the price, and the pledge was not negotiable: an eye, the coin of perception traded for a deeper kind of seeing held in the well's dark clarity. Odin dropped the eye, the water accepted the wager, and a horn, Gjallarhorn, dipped and lifted like a small ceremony between old powers. What the bargain bought was not trivia, not shortcuts, not cheat codes for fate, but a change in how the world arrived in Odin's mind, as if he'd moved from headlights to a lighthouse. He gave up symmetry to gain sincerity of sight, exchanging a constant stream of visible facts for a steadier current of meaning. It hurt, because real learning does, but the ache came bundled with a compass, and the needle was stubborn in the useful way. The drink itself had the aftertaste of memory and the long burn of responsibility, a reminder that knowledge without care is just sharp edges waiting for a reason. Odin's breath steadied as futures aligned into legible patterns, not guarantees, but roads you could walk without constant second-guessing. The well stilled again, keeping his eye like a bookmark in a chapter he would revisit more than once. Afterward, Odin returned one-eyed and more focused, the kind of focus that can tell the difference between noise and rumour, omen and indigestion. He sought counsel often, not only at the well, but with Mimir's head itself, preserved, charmed, and eloquent, because sometimes wisdom needs a voice you can ask follow-up questions. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective, a very Norse combination of grim practicality and impeccable results. That head came to Odin by a path carved through the Aesir-Vanir war, when the Vanir, feeling cheated by a lopsided exchange, beheaded Mimir and sent the problem back with postage due. Odin refused to waste a mind that could still help, so herbs and spells turned silence into guidance, and counsel flowed again, portable and precise. It was the opposite of vengeance, salvage, partnership, and stubborn continuity. When distant hooves of fate begin to rattle the world, it's said Odin rides once more to the well, seeking counsel as Yggdrasil trembles and Heimdall lifts the horn for a louder purpose. In those moments, memory and prophecy shake hands across the water, and even certainty keeps its voice down. If the end must come, let it find leaders who did their homework with both eyes they had, and with one if that's what wisdom cost. The well's location, under a route that reaches toward Jotunheim, says something neat and slightly unsettling. Hard truths often live near hard neighbours, and the shortest path to clarity passes under heavy branches. It's not a tourist spot, it's a threshold, and thresholds prefer visitors who know why they knocked. Stillness is the dress code, and sincerity gets you in every time. So rest with this. Wisdom is rarely free, often uncomfortable, and exactly as nourishing as you hoped it would be after you've paid for it. Maybe that's the lesson in Odin's missing eye. Seeing fewer things but seeing them truer is a bargain that pays out over long distances and long nights. Let the cool of the well reach your forehead, the hush of old water settle your thoughts, and the world simplify to what matters next, one careful breath at a time. Kvasir's brilliance was brewed into mead. Yes, they turned knowledge into beverages, because of course they did. Loki and Odin executed a caper featuring shapeshifts, narrow escapes, and one very undignified bird-form sprint. The result? Poetry gifted to the world, with a few regrettable verse attempts left over. Let the story trickle like a warm sip at midnight. It begins at the truce between Aesir and Vanir, when everyone spit into a shared vat, and from that mingled peace-offering arose Kvasir, a being so wise that questions untied themselves out of respect. He wandered the worlds answering riddles as if they were just shy statements, and for a while, wisdom travelled on foot like a friendly postman with excellent shoes. Breathe in, and imagine answers arriving gently before the question has finished its cup of tea. Then hospitality went sideways in a dwarf hall where Fjalar and Galar invited Kvasir in, ended him, and drained his blood into 3 vessels named Odrarir, Bodn, and Son, mixing it with honey until inspiration learned to ferment. To curious gods, they said he had choked on his own intelligence, which is a very dramatic way to describe murder and mead-making in one sentence. From that day, a sip could turn an ordinary tongue into a scald, and a quiet mind into a lantern. The dwarves' crimes didn't end with Kvasir. They drowned a giant named Gilling, and crushed his grieving wife with a millstone, a cruelty so heavy the floorboards remembered it. Their son, Sutunga, cornered them on a tide-swept rock and accepted the mead as blood price, storing it in Nitbjörg behind stone and intention, with his daughter Gunnlod set to guard what the world suddenly wanted very much. The mead waited like a secret rehearsing its reveal in a locked room that knew lullabies and passwords. Odin heard the rumour of bottled brilliance and put on a travelling name, Bulwark, evil worker, the sort of alias that tells you the plan involves paperwork and trouble holding hands. He worked for Sutunga's brother, Baugi, wheedled for a path to the mountain vault, and when manners reached their limit, he asked an augur called Rati to chew a tunnel like a patient, hungry mouse. At the hole's edge, Odin slipped into snake shape and slid through the rock with the casual confidence of someone who has done this sort of thing before breakfast. Gunnlod met him in the hollow heart of Nitbjörg, where 3 vats glowed with the soft amber of very serious promises. Depending on the telling, Odin courted or bargained, offering poetry of the body for poetry of the mouth, and secured permission for 3 sips that were, technically, generous enough to become 3 gulps that drank everything. He held the mead like sunrise in his throat, and decided not to share it with the floor. Then came the sprint. Odin turned eagle, the kind of bird built for emergency exits and excellent views, and launched into the cold with mead sloshing like a powerful secret trying not to spill. Behind him, Sutunga changed into his own eagle, and the air became a hallway too short for both of them, full of feathers, speed, and regret. Across the sky they raced, fate shouting splits at the mile markers, toward Asgard's walls and waiting vats. The landing was dramatic, and just in time, Odin spat the mead into containers for the gods and for the chosen skalds, turning breath into art before the echo of his wings had fully sat down. A little leaked the other direction. Hurry is a leaky bucket, and fell as the rhymesters' share, the portion that enables poems of highly questionable merit and conference call metaphors. Some nights you sip the good stuff, some nights the rhymesters' share winks and hands you a limerick that should have stayed in drafts. Names linger on the rim: Odrerir, stirrer of inspiration, the vessel or the mead, depending on which skald you ask and how recently they've had a drink. Bodden and Son hum like backup singers in a golden trio, ready to harmonize if anyone forgets the main melody of courage and craft. Even now, those names taste faintly of honey and deadlines. As for Kvasir, the mind that became a beverage never truly vanished. He diffused into stanzas and good ideas. Into the moment a line lands cleanly, and the room exhales together. It's not a gentle origin, but Norse stories often wrap tenderness in thorns and ask you to hold both without flinching. Sip slowly, too fast, and even genius gives you hiccups. If you've ever found the exact word arriving like a friendly raven at your windowsill, that's a drop of the heist behaving kindly in your direction. When the word won't come, blame Sutunga's shadow on the doorway, or the rhymester's share clinging to your syllables like static. Either way, the invitation remains. Breathe in, taste the line, let it finish its sentence in your chest before you put it on the page. Now tuck the chase back into its cloud, fold the eagle's wings, and set the golden kettles on a low simmer, where the steam smells like ideas that are not in a hurry. Let the lids rattle once, politely, then settle, the way inspiration does when it knows you're listening, without tapping your foot. Take a small, respectful sip, and let tonight keep the good portion safe until morning needs it more than you do right now. To glean the runes, Odin hung from Yggdrasil for 9 nights, alone, wind-bitten and oddly serene. He stared into nothing until it spelled everything, and the runes rose to meet him like letters in a dream. Power came not from comfort, but from meaning carved into the dark. Breathe slowly, each breath a quiet, carved line. The ordeal begins where one of Yggdrasil's great roots drinks from the well of Urd, a depth that keeps its own counsel, while the Norns tend fate with a gardener's, patience and a judge's memory. From his high seat, Odin had watched them score reality with tiny signs that travelled the tree like whispered instructions, and he wanted that alphabet the way sailors want stars on a cloudy night. So he chose the kind of vow you only make to yourself and only break by becoming someone new, a sacrifice from Odin to Odin. He lifted Gungnir and made the wound that proved intent, then forbade rescue, hospitality, and even a pity sip from any friend who passed beneath the boughs. 9 nights in the wind, no bread, no horn, no hand at his back, only the slow tilt between living and not that teaches a different kind of grammar. He looked down until down learned how to answer, and the world thinned to a steady, important hush. Yggdrasil did not creak to comfort him. It simply held, as ancient things do when new meanings are being negotiated nearby. The Norns let their water run over bark and roots, and the runes, those small, stubborn angles, began to glow where thought and necessity crossed their arms and nod. When they came, they arrived all at once, like a flock changing direction, and Odin took them with a cry that sounded like steel agreeing with stone. What he gained was not trivia, but tools. Staves for binding and loosening, for healing, for protection, for speaking to what doesn't usually answer, and listening to what rarely stops. Each sign held both a sound and a spell, a letter that doubled as a lever, a little machine for turning luck into something with manners. This was literacy that could lift a curse or shut a door the wind kept opening, and it fit in a hand like a good knife fits a kitchen. The poem that remembers this feat says he seized the runes and then fell, not defeated, but lighter by one ignorance and heavier by many duties. 9 mighty songs followed, learned from the son of Bolthorn, knowledge strung like lanterns along a road he meant to share and to keep, both at once. A draught from Odrarir, the mead that stirs inspiration, sealed the set, because wisdom likes company and a warm drink when it travels. After the hanging came the teaching, the careful distribution of signs and sense, because power without context trips over its own feet in every century. Runes went onto spear shafts and door frames, oars and memorial stones, into songs that remembered what hands had done and warned what hands might do next. They were not decoration, they were negotiations written small, the tidy handwriting of people who prefer their miracles labelled. Odin did not get his eye back, and he did not want it, because the bargain worked as designed. Fewer pictures, clearer patterns, better questions. He walked differently afterward, not faster, just with that purposeful drift of someone who knows where the path narrows and where it kindly widens for two. When prophecy shook the canopy, he could tell the difference between thunder and rumour by the weight of the silence that came after. If this sounds severe, let the severity do its work and then soften, because even hard lessons can hum like lullabies when they finally fit the shape of the day. 9 nights is a long time to practice being quiet, and quiet is often where the best translations happen, from fear into patience, from noise into names. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6, and feel a small rune settle on your tongue like a secret that wants to help and knows how. And when sleep edges close, think of staves like neat footprints around your bed, tiny guardians with tidy boots, each one ready to remind the dark it has good manners here. The tree holds, the well keeps its cool, and the night is long enough for learning without hurry or harm, which is the nicest kind of long. Rest now. What needs carving can wait for morning, and morning will still be there when you open the one eye that truly matters. Loki, the charming complication, brought wonders and headaches in equal servings. He fathered and mothered many beings, including a horse, a wolf, a serpent, and a queen of the underworld, proving family trees can be avant-garde. He was the friend you invite anyway because the party needs a plot twist. Let your chuckle fade into a knowing sigh. Born of the Jotun, Farbauti and Laufey, names like lightning and leaf, Loki learned early how to be both spark and rustle at once, a shapeshifter with a grin that could untie knots or tie them faster. He's counted among the Aesir, clever and capricious, called by many names including Lopt, and he drifts between ally and arsonist of plans with the same easy stride. Bileister and Helblindi are named as his brothers, a thin line of biography that hints at deeper ice beneath the surface. There's a household too, Sigyn, long-suffering and steady, and 2 sons by her, Narfi, or Nari, and Vali, not Odin's Vali, but one made for a particular grief the story later requires. Family, for Loki, is a verb with many conjugations, some tender, some terrible, all memorably spelled. Breathe in gently, and let the vowels soften around the names like felt on wood. By the giantess Angerboda, Loki fathered 3 beings who would tilt the axis of the world. Hel, who became queen of the underworld, Fenrir, a wolf with a horizon in his jaw, and Jörmungandr, the world serpent who learned to hug the earth by encircling it. The gods, seeing trouble on the nursery floor, placed Hel in the realm that bears her name, cast the serpent into the sea, and raised the wolf with wary kindness that would not be enough. Every lullaby in Asgard acquired a minor key after that. Loki's motherhood arrives by way of a contract dispute over Asgard's walls, and a stallion named Svadilfari, whose work ethic was going to ruin a perfectly good loophole. Turning into a mare, Loki led the horse away, returned later with Sleipnir, 8-legged and excellent, whom he gifted to Odin like a punchline that rides better than it reads. Even chaos can be generous when it's proud of its craft. He's also the reason Sif's hair had to be reinstalled with a golden growing upgrade, which accidentally commissioned a suite of treasures, Gungnir, Draupnir and Mjolnir with its infamously short handle, a design quirk with destiny in it. Loki starts fires and then brings water, sometimes in the same bucket, as if balance were a sport and time kept score. Let the anvils in that memory ring once and fade to a friendly hum, but his worst trick is a winter story, the death of Baldur, beloved and bright, engineered by way of mistletoe, and an innocent hand that didn't know it was carrying night. When Hel offered terms to release Baldur if all things wept, Loki as Thok refused the tears, and the world learned how stubborn one know can be. Some silences echo longer than shouts. For this, the gods took him, and punishment arrived with artisan precision. His son's entrails became cords that hardened to iron. A serpent's venom was hung above, and Sigyn held the bowl that spared him drop by drop. When the bowl must be emptied and the sting touches his face, he writhes, and the ground shivers in sympathetic pain the way old houses do in a hard wind. Inhale slowly, exhale the tremor into stillness he never mastered. Prophecy does not end there, because Loki does not end there. When bonds break at Ragnarök, he will rise among the Jötnar and steer a ship woven from the dead's nails through a sea that remembered every name. On the last field he meets Heimdall, watchman of bright thresholds, and they answer each other with finality, two sharp notes struck together and extinguished together. His children take their places, Wolf at the sun's table, Serpent at Thor's horizon, Hel keeping her tally with unflustered hands. Between pranks and dooms there are smaller kindnesses and meaner jokes, 100 threshold moments where he is exactly what the story needs and exactly what the story fears. He is not tidy, and that is part of the truth myths tell when they are brave enough to be useful. If the world must flex to survive, it will need a teacher who loves the hinge as much as the door. Now let the drama settle like snow after the plough, paths visible and quiet again, the names cooling on the tongue like coals that chose to be warm, not wild. Loki is a reminder that change arrives with jokes and collateral, that families can be complicated and still, somehow, instructive. Close your eyes, keep the plot twist, lose the headache, and carry only the part that helps you sleep. Thor rumbled across the skies in a chariot pulled by goats, who were both transport and tomorrow's dinner. He crushed giants like annoying pop-up ads, and then said sorry by eating politely and reviving what he'd roasted. He was thunder with table manners, and somehow that worked. Settle into the steady drum of far-off storm clouds. Their names sounded like the weather chewing on a rock. Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, Teethgrinder and Teethbearer, hooves drumming out a rhythm that turned clouds into cymbals. When the wheels bit the sky, sparks leapt like fireflies who'd over-caffeinated, and thunder rolled behind as if applauding its favourite act. The chariot was a red blur across the horizon, and somewhere a farmer looked up from a fence post and muttered, "Well, there goes the forecast." Thor's travel routine was equal parts practical and cosy. At sundown he'd stable the goats, set the pot to a contented simmer, and lay out the skins like a tidy tablecloth with a secret. Dinner was hearty and cheerful, the kind of meal that ends with a sigh and a belt let out one polite notch. The only rule, spoken every time like grace, was to leave every bone whole and return it to the skins. It happened once in a farmhouse that needed new shingles and less anxiety. Thor and his companions shared the stew with a family who'd learned long ago how to make generosity out of not much. A clever boy named Thialfi eyed a glossy bone for its marrow, and a whisper, encouragement with dimples, nudged him toward a small, satisfying crack. Morning found the skins laid out, the hammer raised, and bones skittering back into shape like they'd remembered the choreography in their sleep. The goats stood, shook themselves, and one limped, just barely, like a dancer hiding a blister. Thor's jaw tightened, not with cruelty, but with that particular ache of a broken rule that mattered. The boy confessed, the family paled, and Thunder leaned forward to see what kind of man the god would be. The answer was unexpected and sturdy. Thialfi and his sister Roskva would come along, not as hostages but as helpers, apprentices to a life that needed quick feet and quicker hearts. On the road, the goats didn't just pull, they steadied. They steadied the chariot, the temper, the travel schedule, and occasionally the plan. If the path grew muddy, they leaned into it like old friends pushing a sofa up a narrow stair. If hills turned steep, their shoulders made them gentle. Their breath was clean as mountain air, and when Thor scratched behind their ears, the sky did a small, pleased flicker of lightning for emphasis. Some nights the wind got ideas and tried to shove the chariot sideways, but goats don't negotiate with gossip. They kept the line true while Thor's hammer purred in his palm, a weather vane with opinions. He spoke to them the way sailors talk to oaken canvas, less command than companionship, less order than agreement. The journey always felt shorter when all four legs of fate had something trustworthy to lean on. There was a lesson in the ritual of bones, the way tomorrow grows out of how carefully you treat today's remains. Leave things whole, and they come back willing. Break what should be kept, and even magic returns with a limp. Thor honoured that, not because he was sentimental, but because he liked his world to work, to be sturdy, to hold when pushed. He was, at heart, maintenance with muscles. The goats knew the routes to halls and headlands, to bridges that sang in rainbow, and to quiet houses where supper always tasted better than it should. Once, when the road veered toward trouble, they planted their hooves and waited for Thor to decide if this was a fight or a conversation. He chose both in the right order, and the chariot rolled on with the satisfied clip of hooves that respect boundaries and a hammer that respects punctuation. In winter, their breath braided into the air like ropes you could climb if you were brave and very small. In summer, dust lifted behind them in gentle veils, and people swore they could hear goat bells in Thunder's belly. Children waved, elders nodded, dogs barked, because that is the law. The chariot never stopped for applause, but Thunder carried the compliments forward. At day's end, when the stew was done and the skins were spread, Thor's hands moved with a craftsman's care. He was never sloppy with miracles, never casual with the recipe of bones set back on bones. The hammer circled, the air thickened, and the goats returned with that slightly embarrassed look of anyone who's been both dinner and guest. Thor scratched their necks and said the same thing he always said. Good work, and the sky relaxed. So let your breath match their steady trot, in on the lift, out on the landing. Picture the wheels glowing softly, the clouds separating like curtains to make room, the sound of far thunder settling into a purr. The goats are patient, the hammer is quiet, and the road ahead is a silk ribbon laid across the evening. Sleep rides better when the driver has table manners, and tomorrow already knows how to stand. Thor once borrowed a giant's boat to fish up the world serpent, because boundaries are optional when you lift mountains. The line went taut, the sea held its breath, and the hook tasted eternity. For a moment, thunder and serpent stared across the world's edge. Feel the hush of a vast ocean holding a secret. The giant in question was Hymir, a hard-skulled, harder-to-please boat owner who preferred whale-sized problems to apocalyptic ones, which is a reasonable boundary for any morning on the water. He set the benches, eyed the weather, and suggested they stay near his usual spot, a humble patch of sea where flatfish and dignity could be caught in equal measure. Thor smiled, the smile that means further out, and the oars began their slow, persuasive conversation with the waves. Bait became an argument right away, because Hymir thought small and sensible while Thor thought large and persuasive, the kind of difference that ends with an ox missing its best feature. Thor took the head from Hymir's finest ox and fixed it to a hook that looked like a dare, the kind of hardware you only use when the sea is big enough to keep secrets. The boat creaked, the rope sighed, and the ocean lowered its voice as the bait fell into the dark, with the manners of a guest who knows how to arrive. A tug came that was not a tug so much as a continental opinion, the kind of pull that rearranges a god's shoulders and teaches wood new sounds. Jörmungandr rose from the depths with poison breath, the sea opening like a pupil widening, to let in light you didn't ask for, but suddenly have to name. Thor planted his feet so firmly that they punched through the bottom boards, a detail the prose Edda preserves because even legends appreciate slapstick if it's accurate. For a heartbeat, god and serpent held each other's gaze like two storms deciding who gets the horizon, and the world leaned in to hear the verdict. Salt stung, rope sang, the hook did its honest work, and Mjolnir lifted in Thor's hand with the pleasant inevitability of thunder, remembering its line. Hymir went pale enough to convince the gulls they were looking at family, and panic found the knife that caution had wisely hidden. Just as Thor drew the serpent high enough to measure by mountains, Hymir slashed the line and everything dropped back into the deep like a secret filing itself away, under later and louder and final. Jörmungandr slid beneath the waves to resume his favourite activity, hugging the world with suspicious affection, and the sea resumed pretending it was only water. Thor, who had been halfway into a very satisfying conclusion, stood with a raised hammer and the unique silence that follows a missed appointment with destiny. Some songs say Thor still landed the blow in older tellings, skaldic verses where the serpent takes a hammer's greeting between the eyes, proof that myths, like memories, sometimes keep alternate endings for special occasions. But the version that reached the longhouses said the line was cut, the moment deferred, and the future marked with a sticky note. See Ragnarok, do not reschedule. Either way, the ocean remembered, because oceans keep better notes than anyone. The image of this duel travelled far. Chiselled on the Altoona runestone, stretched on the Ardra 8 stone, carved on the Herdam stone, echoed at Gosforth where stone learned to tell stories with a sailor's patience. On some stones the knife flashes in Hymir's hand. On others, Thor looks very much alone, as if to say the brave thing is the attempt, not the applause. Centuries held the scene steady, a favourite picture framed by tides and time. On the row back, Hymir's oars made the kind of sounds guilt makes when it pretends to be tired, and Thor let the hammer rest, because sometimes the kinder strength is saving fury for the day that deserves it. The sky unclenched, the boat exhaled, and even the rope seemed relieved to be disappointingly ordinary again. There would be other storms, other verdicts, other mornings with fewer knives and more coffee. As for the serpent, it settled around the world like a belt that knows it's also a warning, patient and perfectly capable of waiting for the bell to ring. Thor returned to shore with seawater in his beard and an unfinished sentence in his chest, the kind that makes sleep easier because it promises a sequel. The sea pretended not to notice, which is the sea's favourite joke. Now, let the boat rock gently under you, a cradle that believes in adult bedtime, while the line coils quietly back into the tub like a tired snake choosing peace for once. Feel the air cool, the salt sweeten, the horizon fold itself small like a letter from tomorrow that you don't have to open yet. When you're ready, let the waves do the rowing and keep only this. Some endings are intermissions, and some intermissions are exactly long enough to sleep. In a giant's hall of clever tricks, Thor and friends competed in contests that were not what they seemed, eating against fire, racing against thought, lifting what could not be lifted, illusions wrapped in courtesy. They left humbled, wiser, and still hungry. Let recognition roll through you. Sometimes the challenge is the story. They had met the road with big travel energy and bigger appetites, slipping through gate bars too wide for ordinary folk, and into a hall where everything was just slightly too large for comfort, like a hotel room designed by a very polite prankster. Their host introduced himself as Utgard Loki, smiling the way a chessboard does before anyone realizes the pawns have names, and insisted that no one could dine here without proving a talent that deserved a seat. Thor squared his shoulders. Loki adjusted his smile, and Thjalfi flexed the kind of confidence only the young can stretch that far. Loki went first because talk is cheap until the food arrives, boasting he could out-eat any man present as if dinner were a negotiation, and he had the best lawyer. His opponent was Logi, a lean, bright-eyed fellow whose name meant wildfire, which should have been the hint on the label, but labels were not being read closely tonight. They met in the middle of a trough, Loki having finished the meat while Loki consumed meat, bones, and the trough itself, which is how fire argues, with everything in the room. Thjalfi volunteered next with runner's optimism, lining up against a competitor named Hugi, which translates to thought, something even quick feet respect in a race. They ran, and the air seemed to step aside for Hugi, who reached the post as if he'd started there and merely remembered to show it, which is very like thought when it's ready. Thjalfi learned that speed is impressive until it tries to pass an idea that already arrived. Then it was Thor's turn, and the host suggested a friendly drink from a horn that looked manageable at the small end and suspicious at the large. Thor tilted it back and drank like weather making up its mind, only to discover the horn drew from the sea itself, so his long pulls became the world's first lesson in tides. The hall murmured as if someone had told it a secret it already knew, but admired hearing out loud. Next came the cat, a long, lazy creature that stretched like a calendar, and Thor was dared to lift it, because sometimes hospitality wears a dare like cologne. He pulled and raised only a single paw, and everyone went very quiet in the way people do when they watch someone almost do the impossible without realizing how close they came. Later, he would learn the cat was Jormungandr in a house-friendly outfit, and that paw was the horizon flexing. Finally, an old woman named Ellie shuffled forward for a wrestling match no heroic saga would normally schedule, which should have signalled metaphor on the marquee. They grappled gently, and then less gently, and Thor lowered, not for lack of heart, but because old age is undefeated in every league that keeps good records. Politeness covered the moment like a blanket placed carefully over pride. On the way out, their host escorted them beyond the doors with the kind cheer of someone returning borrowed tools, and revealed the joke's machinery with clean, considerate hands. He was Skrymir in disguise on the road, the one whose knotted pack Thor couldn't unbind because it was fastened with tricks, and whose head survived Thor's 3 hammer blows by hiding a mountain in the way, which is one method to avoid concussion. Those 3 valleys outside, he said, were the footprints of Thor's wrath, a cartographer's love letter to honest effort. As for the contests, every opponent had been an idea in costume. Loki against wildfire, Thjalfi against thought, Thor's horn against the ocean, the cat against a world serpent, and the wrestler against old age, which never forgets its steps. Utgard Loki admitted he would never have let them in had he known the true measure of their strength, a compliment framed as a caution sign. He advised they not meet again, for everyone's peace and furniture's safety, which is the sort of boundary even thunder can respect after a long night. Hearing this, Thor lifted Mjolnir with the reflex of a closing door, but the giant and the whole stronghold dissolved like fog that remembers it has other places to be, leaving only open land and a strange quiet. It's unsettling to swing at a mirage and feel the weight of your own arm more than the blow, but humility can be a decent pillow when pride is tired. They stood a while, letting the lesson cool enough to carry in bare hands. On the road back, the world felt both larger and lighter, like a backpack packed correctly after 3 tries, and even Loki walked softly, which is how you know the evening made its point. Thjalfi listened harder to the wind's advice, and Thor let the sky unclench, deciding that strength is better saved for tasks that don't vanish when thanked. Hunger returned politely, which is the body's way of saying the story can pause here and still be true in the morning. So let your breath match the leaving steps. In, out, not hurried, not ashamed, just wiser in the shoes you already own, and warmer for the walk. Some halls are tests in tasteful clothing, and some victories are learning which doors were scenery the whole time. Sleep finds you easier when you're done wrestling old age and ready to eat with thought, not against it. Idun kept a basket of golden apples that politely bullied age into waiting. When she was lured away, wrinkles tiptoed back into Asgard like unpaid bills. The gods felt their knees, their necks, their calendars. Exhale as the apples return, and time puts its shoes back on. She is the goddess of youth, a quiet professional with a portable orchard, married to Bragi the poet, whose job description includes keep everyone looking like their best portrait until further notice. The apples live in a modest basket, but their magic is loud. One bite and grey remembers how to be gold again, and joints vote to extend the warranty. The Norse gods aren't truly immortal, they just have an excellent rejuvenation plan with very strict inventory control. The trouble begins with an eagle and a bad bargain, the kind that starts as a scuffle and ends with paperwork no one wants to sign. Thiazi, a giant with wings and opinions, forced Loki to promise he'd bring Idun and her fruit outside the safety of Asgard for a quick comparison with even better apples, which is exactly how shopping trips become kidnappings in myth. Idun, trusting and tidy, walked into the wood carrying tomorrow on her arm. The sky stooped, feathers filled the clearing, and Thiazi snatched her away to Jotunheim, where the walls echo and the pantry does not include courtesy. Back in Asgard, hair silver bloomed overnight, spines negotiated noisily with chairs, and even Odin checked a mirror with the face of someone who suddenly understands calendars. A council was called with the urgency of people watching their warranty expire in real time. Loki, discovered as the hinge of the disaster, faced a choice between consequences and competence, and chose competence for once, promising to restore Idun before the creaks became crunches. He borrowed Freya's feather cloak, the deluxe model for high-speed retrievals, and dove toward Jotunheim, where cold keeps secrets and giants keep what isn't theirs. Finding Idun alone, he transformed her into a nut, easy to carry, hard to break, and leapt for home with the kind of speed that makes wind feel sedentary. Thiazi returned to find his guest gone, and the air still tasting of feathers, then launched after them in eagle form, huge enough to cast a moving eclipse. Asgard's walls appeared, and the gods stacked shavings for a sudden blaze, timing the flame like a trapdoor opening exactly on cue. Thiazi streaked through fire, fell with his feathers aflame, and the chase ended in a brightness that let the apples come home quietly. Idun stepped back into Asgard like a clockmaker returning from lunch, and the basket did what it does best, turn groans into sighs, and years into, "Oh, that's better." Faces unwrinkled, backs reconsidered their rebellion, and voices found the note that doesn't sound tired at the edges. The gods didn't say thank you loudly, but they ate it, which is the local dialect for gratitude. Repercussions travelled behind the rescue, as they do. Skadi, Thiazi's daughter, arrived armoured in grief and demanded redress, a story of laughter and mismatched marriage that belongs to another night's careful telling. But for Idun, the work resumed. No speeches, no drama, just the steady cadence of maintenance that keeps a world feeling like itself. Some miracles are dramatic. Hers is a refill. Scholars point out that apples may mean fruit more broadly, or something nut-like, as if the word itself put on a disguise. But the effect is clear in any dialect. Youth on tap, shelf-stable hope, best served regularly. Whether apple, fruit, or metaphor with good taste, the medicine works and the myth remembers who brings the tray. It's less a fountain of youth than a well-timed reminder. There's a gentleness to Idun's power that makes war gods and wisdom hoarders breathe easier, the way a fresh page quiets a messy desk. No thunder, no runes carved deep into fate, just a golden bite that persuades time to wait in the hallway until it's called. It's hard to be dramatic when the solution is snack-sized, which is probably the point. So settle your shoulders and imagine the basket close by, the fruit warm from the day, and the room relaxing as calendars unclench. Let the creak in your thoughts smooth out as if brushed by careful fingers and a very patient orchard. Exhale. The apples are home, the clocks are friendly, and tomorrow has decided to be kind again. Balder, beloved and radiant, dreamed of doom, and the world got very careful. Oaths were sworn by everything except one small, unassuming plant, because what harm could mistletoe do? Fate smiled a quiet, tired smile. Close your eyes and feel how fragile even sunlight can be. Frigg moved through the worlds with a mother's mission, asking fire and water, iron and stone, sickness and serpent, bird and beast to swear they would never harm her shining sun, and they promised as if promising could rewire destiny itself. Mistletoe seemed too young, too mild, a soft green afterthought on an oak's strong arm, and so it was not asked and did not swear, which is how small things learn to keep very large appointments. Back in Asgard, relief arrived like a warm cloak, and Balder's laughter fell into the room the way light does on a good morning. With invulnerability declared, the gods turned precaution into play, gathering to toss stones, spears, and jokes at Balder, while each weapon turned to buttered wind and fell harmlessly at his feet. A carnival game with a beloved prize who always won by not noticing. Even Odin watched, grave and hopeful, as if repetition could make a prophecy forget its own lines, while Frigg stood nearby and pretended not to count heartbeats between throws. Safety, it turns out, is a comfortable chair that sometimes has one loose bolt. Loki arrived in the shape of a kindly old woman, the sort of face people tell secrets to when the tea is hot and the afternoon is long, and he asked Frigg if everything had indeed sworn its oath, every last stubborn thing. When she confessed the exception, mistletoe, the young, the harmless, he thanked her with a nod that didn't quite reach his eyes and went to the forest to pluck a green idea with sharp intentions. A dart or spear was shaped, small but serious, the kind of tool that never boasts, because it has nothing to prove and everything to do. At the assembly, he found Herder, Balder's blind brother, standing apart from the game like a song with no chorus, and placed the mistletoe in his hand with gentle directions and terrible kindness. Herder cast the twig as others cast their safer laughter, and the hall learned how quickly a moment can change its mind, for the green flew straight, and Balder fell as if the horizon had tilted to give him a softer landing. Silence arrived the way winter does, completely and without asking permission, and grief began taking measurements for a room it would occupy for a very long time. The funeral needed the sea, and Ringhorni, Balder's great ship, would not budge until the giantess Hyrrokin came, riding a wolf and using serpents as reins, and shoved the vessel waterward with a strength that set the rollers on fire and everyone's nerves on edge. Upon the deck they laid him with treasures and sorrow, and Nanna, his wife, followed him in death as if love could not bear to be divided, her heart breaking like quiet porcelain in a sudden cold. The pyre lifted smoke that smelled like endings and oaths, and the waves kept their serious counsel while flames spelled words no one could quite read aloud. Odin sent Hermoda riding Sleipnir to Hel's dim halls, where the air is honest and the doors are thorough, to ask for Balder's release if love could prove itself sufficiently loud. Hel agreed to the test. If all things wept for Balder, then Balder would come home, a condition that sounded like a kindness and felt like a cliff edge. The worlds began to cry, stone and tree and iron and bird, and the path back brightened almost, until a single voice refused. They called her Thok, a figure in a cave who would not weep, perhaps Loki in another borrowed face, perhaps simply the part of fate that does not budge for pleading, and with that untear, the door stayed shut. Balder remained in Hel's keeping, a perfect guest in a place made for completed stories, while Asgard learned how to rearrange the dining table without him. Sometimes what is missing becomes the most faithful member of the family, attending every silence on time. Vengeance and justice tried on their heavy boots. Odin sired Vali, who grew to manhood in a day and killed Herder, though in some tellings the blame and the blow travel on different roads than the ones grief prefers. No one felt better, because numbers aren't a cure for emptiness, and arithmetic behaves badly in the presence of love. So the gods polished their rituals and carried the gap like a lantern that lights what it cannot fill. Prophecy keeps its own calendar, and it says Balder will return after Ragnarök, when the world has boiled and cooled and decided to be green again, his presence then a soft repaired light in a morning that has learned new manners. Until that day, mistletoe hangs in the story like a warning written in lowercase, reminding everyone that small things can keep large promises, and that caution and care are different verbs. Breathe out and let the radiance dim gently, like a candle cupped against wind that has finally agreed to be kind for a while. To bind the wolf Fenrir, the gods promised safety with a hand behind their back, and Tyr put his hand in the wolf's mouth to keep that promise honest. The ribbon looked delicate but was woven of impossibilities, the sound of a cat's footstep, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish. The bite came like a period at the end of a vow. Hold still with the courage of necessary risk. Fenrir grew in Asgard like a storm raised indoors, all pause and promise, and only Tyr had the steadiness to feed him, palm to muzzle, oath to tooth, day after careful day. The others felt the future vibrating in the wolf's shoulders, a prophecy breathing in his ribs, and they looked away the way people do when the horizon starts saying things. Love and worry shared a bowl, and neither finished first. They tried simple tests first, fetters with proud names, lading, then dromy, chains heavy enough to make mountains reconsider their posture. Each time Fenrir flexed, metal learned it was only metal, and the links became scrap and memory, the way rules do when they forget who they're for. Applause felt thin, concern grew teeth. So a messenger went down to the forges under the earth where solutions are hammered into being, and the dwarves spun Gleipnir, a ribbon that looked like a compliment and behaved like a verdict. It was woven from what does not quite exist: cat's footfall, woman's beard, mountain's root, fish's breath, bird's spittle, ingredients you cannot gather unless you also know how to gather silence. Light as a sigh, strong as a boundary that has made up its mind. Gleipnir did not bother to sparkle. When the gods brought the ribbon, Fenrir halted mid-growl and narrowed his moonbright eyes, because a trap that polite is still a trap. "Bind me if you must," he said, "but put a hand between my jaws as surety. So if you lie, I will have something to keep from you forever," and the room lost its appetite for volunteering. Promises are easier spoken by crowds than kept by one. Tyr stepped forward with a steadiness that made the floorboards respectful, not because he loved deception, but because he loved the world enough to hold it still while it chose its next breath. He set his right hand in the wolf's mouth the way a key fits a lock, and let trust hum through his bones, knowing exactly how the music would end. Around them the gods smiled too brightly, as people do in waiting rooms. Gleipnir slipped over Fenrir's limbs like evening, soft, complete, and when the wolf strained, nothing moved except his anger, which is famously athletic. The moment the truth stood up and cleared its throat, Fenrir bit down, and Tyr's hand became the price printed in small, unambiguous letters at the bottom of the contract. Everyone laughed except the man who had paid, a detail the poets kept because accuracy is a kind of honour. They carried the bound wolf to Lyngvi, the Heather Island, and made the bindings thorough, fastening lines to rock and certainty, so that the world could get its work done without the furniture rearranging itself nightly. A sword was wedged in Fenrir's jaws to hold them open, a grim prop that kept the air moving at the cost of comfort, the sort of compromise people make when the alternative is worse in every direction. On the shore, the gods practiced breathing like normal again, which took longer than expected. What did it mean that the god of law and oaths broke an oath and called it necessary? It meant law is a tool for life, not the other way around, and sometimes justice comes with receipts written in blood that no one wanted, but everyone understands. Tyr became lighter by a hand and heavier by the weight of his example, which is not an even trade, but is a true one. Prophecy doesn't leave, it lingers. One day Fenrir will break loose when the sky's seams give way, and the field with no fences will call his name, and a long-foretold meeting with Odin will be kept under a shattered sun. But that is a later chapter, filed under endings that begin again, and the page is not turned yet, not tonight, not while the bindings hold and the world makes bread and jokes and small repairs. Even wolves sleep, and so do storms when the hour is kind. If you need a lesson to take to bed, take this smaller one. Courage is sometimes the quiet math of paying what must be paid so the morning can arrive on time. Tyr does not roar or boast. He adjusts to a new balance and keeps walking, a one-handed compass, pointing to the middle of the road where people can meet and speak without shouting. The hand is gone, the grip remains. Now let your jaw unclench and your breath settle into even loops. Like Gleipnir's patient, weave laid flat against fur that refuses to forget but agrees to wait. Some promises are heavy and some are thin as ribbon, and both can hold if made with steady eyes and paid for honestly when the moment asks its question. Sleep here, where necessary risks have already been taken, and the night is safe enough for softer dreams to try their steps. Heimdall stands at Bifrost, hearing grass grow and wool whisper, the world's quietest security system. He doesn't sleep, doesn't blink much, and can spot trouble like a parent in a silent house. The bridge hums in colours that taste like clean rain. Let vigilance be a lullaby in slow, steady hues. His hall, Himinbjörg, perches where the rainbow meets the rim of heaven, a keepsake box at the end of light. The steps up are always tidy, swept by wind that knows its manners, and the view is the kind that makes even gods speak a little softer. If you listen with him, you can almost hear the day folding itself neatly and putting tomorrow on top. Heimdall's senses are dialed past ordinary. Sight that strolls for miles without getting winded, ears that catch the feather sound of sheep getting dressed. He requires less sleep than a bird because the night trusts him, and because peace likes someone to hold its hand after sundown. When he inhales, the bridge brightens. When he exhales, the colours rest. Bifrost itself is a good neighbour, beautiful to visit, terrible to trespass. It burns a polite red at the edges as a warning to frost giants who don't read signs, and its span shakes only when the world needs a reminder that nothing important is ever entirely easy. By day, it looks like a promise. By night, it looks like a password. Each morning, the gods cross, hooves ringing a friendly rhythm on the bands of light, headed to the well where decisions put on their shoes. There's one exception. Thor wades the boiling rivers instead because some people prefer their commute to double as leg day. Heimdall watches them all with that calm, satisfied focus of a locksmith who knows every hinge in town. He carries Gjallarhorn, a horn that does not gossip. It waits by his side like a final draft, its breath saved for the one moment when volume is kindness. On quiet days, it looks like a decorative choice. On serious days, it looks like a lighthouse. Even its silence is reassuring, the way a seatbelt feels before a drive. About his smile, some say his teeth gleam like small summer moons, a gold-toothed grin that will not be surprised twice. It's not showy, it's serviceable radiance like a porch light that knows when to turn on by itself. If he laughs, it's a low, well-oiled sound that doesn't carry far, but persuades nearby worries to sit down. Old stories whisper that he was born of 9 mothers, the waves themselves, perhaps, which would explain why his patience moves like water, persistent, shaping coastlines without argument. He stands at a threshold and understands thresholds, between day and night, between noise and news, between almost and now. Thresholds are where careful people live. Visitors arrive, messengers with shoes that don't squeak, travellers with good questions, the occasional raven taking notes. Heimdall greets them with the exact amount of attention they earned on the way up. His hospitality is firm but kind, like a doorman who remembers your name and also your worst idea. Sometimes he leans on the rail and tastes the air for omens. The red band on Bifrost glows a touch warmer when someone thinks about testing a fence. He does not fidget. He adjusts the angle of his watch and lets problems announce themselves. A true sentinel doesn't chase shadows. He lets the light do the introducing. He knows a day is coming when the sky will split like a seam and the sons of fire will ride, and the bridge will do what valiant things do at the end of their shift, break with dignity. He also knows what his horn will say then, a single note large enough to fit all the necessary courage inside it. Even that knowledge rests quietly at his shoulder, like a packed bag by the door. There is, somewhere on the far side of prophecy, a final quarrel with an old adversary, and 2 figures who fall together when the argument is finished. Heimdall has already made peace with this math. The important part is making sure everyone else gets where they're going first. Keys returned, lights off, doors locked gently. Until then, vigilance is just good housekeeping. He straightens the bands of colour when wind scruffs them, oils the hinges of the horizon, and files reports in the ledger of nothing happened thanks to attention. He is not bored, he is content, and contentment is what busy people always swear they'll try next year. Now, place a hand on the banister of the bridge in your mind. Feel it cool and clean, humming the soft chord of safety done right. Let your breath take the same route the gods take, up, across, down, arriving exactly on time. The colours don't hurry, they hold. The horn doesn't shout, it waits. And the watcher, as always, watches, so you don't have to. Freya wears Brisingamen, a necklace that looks like midnight deciding to sparkle. She leads Valkyries, weaves cider, and turns desire into a map people follow without getting lost. Her power is softness with teeth. Breathe in the perfume of starlit rooms and secret doors. Brisingamen sits at her throat like a spell with good manners, forged by master craftsmen and acquired in a tale told with equal parts admiration and raised eyebrows, which is how the best jewellery stories go in the Old North. It doesn't shout, it insists, lending her presence the quiet gravity of a night sky that remembered to bring stars. In some tellings, the necklace is the price of a complicated bargain, but the result is always the same. When she enters, rooms learn how to glimmer. Her realm is Folkvanga, a wide, bright field that receives half of those slain in battle, while the other half ride to Odin's Valhalla, because even the afterlife respects a balanced workload and a second opinion. Within Folkvanga stands Sessrumnir, a hall roomy enough for grief to sit down and courage to stand up again, a place that feels like preparation wrapped in rest. Freya's welcome is brisk and kind, like someone who can braid hair and battle plans at the same time. Travel suits her, sometimes in a chariot pulled by cats, whose paws make almost no sound on the Rainbow Bridge, sometimes astride Hildisvini, the battle boar with sunrise in his bristles, and sometimes as a falcon when the feather cloak trades footsteps for wing beats. That cloak has a lending policy, and more than one deity has borrowed it, because favours are a currency she spends wisely and often. Distance is a door she opens with a hinge of feathers and a handle of wind. She is mistress of cedar, the old magic that bends probability and persuades fate to reconsider its posture, a craft so deft even Odin learned at her side before carrying it like a new scar that meant skill, not sorrow. With cedar, threads that look tangled reweave into patterns that make hearts calmer and horizons clearer, at least for those willing to sit still while the knots remember how to unlearn themselves. It is not flashy sorcery. It's midnight handiwork that leaves morning tidier than it found it. Desire, in her hands, is not clamour but compass, pointing men and women toward what they would choose anyway if fear would hush for 1 minute and let them speak. She is called Mardel, Geffen, Seer, Vanadis, names like facets that catch different kinds of light, and each tells a version of the same truth. Love is powerful precisely because it is specific. When she grieves for Oda, often absent and ever beloved, her tears fall as red gold, which is the most Freya way for sorrow to behave, beautiful and spendable, luminous and heavy. Her daughters, Hanos and Gersemi, bear names that mean treasure, the sort you cannot stack but can carry for life, in the way your voice changes when you say home. Giants covet her hand because even enemies understand the mathematics of her value, and the negotiations are never simple, which is why stories keep returning to her door to ask how peace and pride might coexist. She answers in the language of terms, not tantrums, and the outcomes improve accordingly. On battlefields, Valkyries ride like disciplined weather, and in many traditions she is their captain or their closest kin, dividing the fallen with a fairness that feels like mercy doing its best within hard math. Half come to her fields, where rest is not idleness but recovery, the kind of quiet that gives back more than it takes. Even in war's long shadow, she is a lamp that refuses to waste oil. At night, when cedar is strongest and most polite, Brisingamen hums against her skin in a key that doors remember and locks choose to admire rather than resist. She whispers across distances for those who ask for help properly, and the thread you thought you'd lost finds your fingers again, soft and sure. The charm isn't that nothing is hard, it's that the hard thing arrives with handles. If you are seeking, she makes seeking kinder. If you are mourning, she makes mourning useful. If you are joyful, she makes joy honest enough to survive winter. This is the arithmetic of her night magic. Desire clarified, courage adorned, endings lit so the next path can see where to start. Breathe in, and let the scent of iron, honey, and rain say what words would only smudge. You are allowed to want what will actually love you back. Now imagine the necklace as a moon pressed to your pulse, the cat's kneading cloud, the boar snorting at fear until it remembers to laugh, and the falcon cloak rustling where your worries hang their coats. Let the room dim to the colour of a full pocket of wishes, and your spine unwind like thread that trusts the spool. Sleep understands her language. It arrives quietly, beautifully, and exactly on time. Sea god Njord loved the gulls. Mountain huntress Skadi loved the crisp bite of snow. They tried his place, her place, and found that compromise sometimes just means different kinds of lovely loneliness. They parted kindly, like grown-ups who know themselves. Let acceptance lighten in your chest. Their story begins with a reckoning. Skadi arrived in Asgard armoured and unblinking to claim compensation for her father Thiazi, who had been slain after the gods forced Loki to undo the kidnapping of Idun and her apples. The Aesir offered a settlement that followed old law and new courtesy. They must make her laugh, and she may choose a husband from among them by seeing only their feet, which is either poetic or impractical depending on your shoe budget. Odin added a skyward kindness by casting Thiazi's eyes into the heavens as stars, a glittering punctuation mark on grief. Loki, appointed court jester by temperament and opportunity, solved the laughter clause with a notorious stunt involving a goat, a rope, and his own dignity, which leapt, squealed, and finally landed in Skadi's lap to her surprised amusement. With laughter earned, the foot-picking commenced, and Skadi chose the fairest ankles in the room, believing them boulders, only to discover they belonged to Njord, lord of calm seas and crowded harbours. It was an omen in miniature, beauty recognised, compatibility mistaken, lesson pending. They tried the mountains first, in Skadi's hall of Thrymheim, where snow keeps a respectful hush and wolves practice their long vowels at dusk. Njord, who speaks fluent wave, did not sleep well in a choir of wolves, and the wind there tasted like salt that had forgotten its ship, so he counted the days and confessed that 9 nights were 9 too many for his sea-soft ears. Mountains I loathed, he is remembered to have said. The howling of wolves was ugly to me compared to the whooping of swans, which is either taste or destiny doing its tidy work. They tried Noaton next, Njord's harbour home, where gulls open the morning and shipyards clatter with useful noise that smells like tar, fish, and plans. Skadi turned on the pillow, awake before dawn, and found the gulls mewing as relentless as waves on a thought, declaring she could not sleep for the noise of the mew, the bird that flies each dawn from deep water. 9 nights there felt like 9 polite misunderstandings stacked in a row, each bowing to the next. So they did the adult thing myths rarely permit. They acknowledged the distance between sea joy and snow joy, and let the marriage ease into separation without malice or melodrama. Njord kept Noaton's peers honest, granting fishermen safe returns and sending soft weather prayers where they'd do the most good. Skadi returned to Thrymheim on her skis, quiver full, stride steady, a silhouette cut cleanly against the white. Their union had always been a truce between warm and cold, a legal closure to a feud braided with a try at love, and even in ending, it kept the law's polite shape. Some call it the divine divorce, notable for its lack of thunder, proof that not every ending has to practice making a mess to be real. They remained themselves, simply at addresses that stopped arguing with their bones. The myth keeps practical details like signposts, 9 nights here, 9 nights there, measured not to hedge a bet, but to test an honest hope. Each found, after those careful intervals, that comfort blooms where senses feel at home and wilts where they feel surrounded. No villain, no victim, just geography choosing the rhythm of 2 good hearts. Skadi's acceptance into Asgard did not vanish with the marriage. She stayed counted and respected, a mountain force on cordial terms with a city of skyward roofs. Njord kept his seat among the Vanir-blooded gods, whose gifts are prosperity and peace, a tidy pair to keep near the ledger of seafarers and trade winds. If they missed each other, the story does not scold them for it. It lets the longing be a quiet room inside them both. There's a small wisdom tucked in their verses. The sounds you fall asleep to are not trivial. They're signatures of belonging, and swapping signatures does not always make a better letter. Wolves and swans both sing honest songs. The mistake is assuming one chorus must be enough for 2 very different listeners. Call it compatibility, call it climate. Myths, call it fate, with good manners. If you need a moral for the bedside, lamp, try this. Compromise is noble until it becomes erosion, and the kindest choice can be 2 front doors held open instead of 1 slammed shut. Njord did not become a mountain. Skadi did not become a harbour. Both refused to become resentments, which is rarer and braver than it sounds. That is a victory measured in sleep, not speeches, which is the best kind at this hour. Now picture foam lace on a tide as Noatun breathes in, and a blue shadow crossing a high pass as Thrymheim breathes out, the world completing itself on alternating beats. Let gull and wolf trade polite distances, while you choose the lullaby that fits your ribs tonight. Sea hush or snow hush, both true, both tender in their right places. Exhale into acceptance. There's room for you exactly where you rest best, and tomorrow will find you there without asking you to move mountains or drain seas first. Freyr traded his best sword for the hand of Gerda, because love in any era is expensive and irrational. The fields sighed with abundance, and a future shadow sighed back. He chose warmth now over armour later. Exhale into the sweet risk of saying yes. Here is how it starts. Freyr sits on Hlidskjalf, Odin's high seat, and looks where he shouldn't, which is also where stories like to begin. And there she is, Gerda, lifting her arms so that light spills over sky and sea as if dawn borrowed her sleeves. He rises heartsick, the useful kind that makes plans and forgets to eat, and the hall gets very quiet because everyone can hear a god, trying not to be dramatic and failing gorgeously. Desire, a shy engineer, sketches a bridge between Vanaheim's golden fields and a giant's garden at the edge of frost, and then suggests he call a friend who knows logistics. Enter Skirnir, a servant with stubborn feet and a negotiator's patience, who agrees to cross into Jotunheim as Freyr's envoy, but only if paid with a sword that fights by itself, which is the kind of invoice that makes futures drum their fingers. Freyr unclamps his grip and hands it over, because some choices are not balanced on a scale so much as flung like a coin into a well that answers in seasons. Skirnir sets out with promises, poetry, and the kind of optimism you pack next to threats in case the conversation needs both shoes. He stands before Gerda and offers gifts, golden apples that smell like warm afternoons, and Draupnir's lineage of multiplying rings, abundance behaving politely in stacks of 9. She refuses with the steady grace of someone who knows her own weather, and the air goes thin in the pauses between words, which is when Skirnir unfolds the shadow side of persuasion. The threats are cold, long, and surgical, and at last she yields with terms set to time and place, because even consent wears a wince in this telling. The meeting is fixed at Bari, a grove whose name feels like breathing out, 9 nights from now, which in love math equals 9 eternities, and at least 3 dramatic stares out a window. Skirnir returns successful in the way messengers are when victory tastes a little like iron, and Freyr listens with the expression of a man who just discovered clocks can be rude. Long is one night, longer are 2, he laments, because patience is a virtue that rarely receives fan mail from passion's desk. Still, Barry arrives, as groves do, soft with green, and the hush that comes when the world agrees to be kind for an hour, and Freyr meets Gerda where the light is fair and the ground feels willing. The union reads like agriculture learning a love song, sky and earth exchanging vows in a language crops remember at root depth. In later tellings of kings and lineages, there is even a son, Fjolnir, because abundance likes to file paperwork properly when it can. The price remains, resting where prices rest, in the sheath that is now empty of a self-fighting sword, a vacancy that will matter when Surtur brings a flaming punctuation mark to the final chapter. This is not a surprise to anyone who has ever traded armour for a sunny afternoon, and then remembered thunderstorms are real too, even on good calendars. Freyr does not regret, he simply catalogues the cost with farmerly honesty and keeps sowing. Gerda's name carries fences and fields, the pleasant geometry of boundaries that protect what grows, and her beauty is the kind that arrives as weather rather than costume. Freyr, whose portfolio includes rain with manners, grain with opinions, and a boar that glows like optimism, finds his complement not by conquest but by arrangement, uneasy and true. If the cosmos is a farm, this was the day it learned to flirt and to plan the harvest on the same page. Some listeners will want a cleaner wooing, fewer threats, fewer bargains that smudge the edges of joy, and that is fair. Myths tell us what happened and then ask us to do better by the same stars. What remains clear is the axis. Desire drew the line, choice inked it, and consequence kept the ledger without drama, only totals. Love flowers, fields answer, and somewhere a sword-shaped silence waits its turn to speak in firelight. So rest with the sweetness and the shadow both, because bedtime is where complicated truths learn to lie still without pretending to be simple. Let Barry's leaves lift and fall in your chest, 9 slow breaths that arrive exactly when they mean to, and not a moment sooner. Warmth now, armor later. In the meantime, may your harvest be generous and your waiting brief. Down in Hell's realm, things are orderly, unglamorous, and honest, like a tidy pantry of destinies. There's no pitchfork pageantry, just rooms for stories that ended the usual way. Even endings have neighborhoods. Walk softly. Everything here is resting. Hel is the daughter of Loki and Angerboda, appointed by Odin to rule the underworld that bears her name, a jurisdiction defined less by punishment than by paperwork and permanence. Her appearance is famously divided, half flesh-toned, half blue, like a visual reminder that she stands with one foot in each fact, life and what comes after. Her expression is downcast, not from malice, but from management, which is its own gravity. The realm itself is called Hel, sometimes Helheim, in later tellings, and it stretches downward and northward beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, where cold behaves like a careful librarian. Most of the dead come here, not as verdicts but as citizens, continuing in quieter versions of themselves, while the world upstairs keeps making noise. Think of it as the default address, where no special arrangements were made with spears and songs. To reach it, there's the Hel Vegar, the Hel Road, trod by gods and mortals who have business with endings, and it crosses the River Gjöll by a bridge so pale it reflects hesitation. Modguda, a watchful keeper, asks her questions at the bridge, and Garma the Hound is said to guard the threshold like a bell that only rings for honesty. Hel is a place with doors that prefer visitors who know why they knocked. Inside stands her hall, Eljudnir, vast and undecorated, with implements named for hunger and famine, and other honest realities of being finished with appetites. Servants go about their business with the quiet competence of people who understand that routine is a kindness, where surprises are no longer required. If there are curtains, they are there to soften drafts, not to make grand entrances. Hell is not the Christian hell, even if the words share a root that means hidden, as if both traditions agreed that afterlife lives behind a curtain first and a sermon second. This is not torture's theatre. It is a concealed place where the majority rest, and rest is treated as a serious craft. The closest sound is the hush of long stories setting themselves down like books closing on cue. When Balder died and the worlds cried out, Hel received him as she receives all, firmly and without fuss, and offered the famously conditional kindness: if everything wept, he could return. The weeping nearly succeeded until one figure withheld a tear, and with that the rule stood, because rules do what they are made to do when rooms are run correctly. Fairness here feels chilly but consistent, which is how fairness often feels when it isn't dressed up for festivals. Hel's realm is mapped by simple certainties: walls to keep winds polite, rivers that sound like iron remembering battles it no longer wishes to fight, and gates that open for everyone exactly once. The geography is plain because plainness is restful, and rest is the point. Even the dark here is organized, like linens folded by someone who knows you'll be looking for the softest one first. Some accounts place Hel under a specific root of Yggdrasil, noting that the great ash feeds even what feeds on memory, and the tree does not discriminate in its duties. Roots creep where stories finish, bringing water and order to shelves of silence that still need tending. The underworld is part of the world the way a basement is part of a house, useful, cool, and full of things worth keeping. If the realm sounds bleak, remember that bleakness can be a kind of honesty that keeps its promises, and promises are good company when bravado is clocked out. Hel's authority is not cruelty but continuity, a supervisor of thresholds making sure everyone's transition is logged, stamped, and gently filed. It is the bureaucracy of mercy. No favourites, no fireworks, no one misplaced. Hel herself is not a villain here, just the keeper whose job description is, do not let the door swing the wrong way. which is harder than it looks when winds from the living blow loud. She maintains the quiet in a realm built to be exactly quiet enough, like a library that knows which shelf you need before you ask. If she smiles, it's small and professional, the way receptionists smile when you have finally arrived. Travellers, Odin among them, have come and gone for counsel, carrying back information that tastes like cold air and policy, and the gate resumed being a gate when they passed. No one lingers without belonging, and no one belonging is hurried, which is the entire philosophy etched into the lintel here. The dead are not punished for being done, they are simply done, and done is its own quiet dignity. So step softly in your thoughts, past the bridge, the dog, the keeper's questions, and into the hall where everything has finally stopped insisting on itself. There is a seat for every name, and a blanket for every chill, and the lights are set to enough to find your place, and no brighter. When you leave, because you are only visiting, close the door gently and let the hidden place keep doing what hidden places do best. Hold what we're not ready to drop and keep it safe until we are. A seeress spoke, and the future arrived early, sitting at the edge of the bed like a cat. Wolves would unhinge the sky, ships would sail on a sea of dead men's nails, and old grudges would stretch their legs. The gods listened, already walking toward it. Feel the slow drum of inevitability that doesn't hurry. She is the vulva of Völuspá, called to speak, while the Norns measure what was, what is becoming, and what shall be under Yggdrasil's roots, and her voice lands like snow that remembers spring is still coming after the flood. Destiny in these tales is woven, not negotiated, and even the All-Father hears it as weather, not advice. The name itself tilts between fate and twilight, Ragnarök and Ragnaröka, both correct, both true, both patient. First come the omens, polite as knocks that don't stop knocking. Fimbul winter, 3 long winters with no summers between, a cold with opinions and a calendar of its own. Hunger arrives as a tutor with a hard lesson, and oaths crumble like old bread as kin lifts hand against kin in the small, terrible math of scarcity. Roosters crow in 3 realms to announce the end of the shift. Gullinkambi in Asgard, Fjalar among giants, and a rust-red herald in the north, so everyone shows up on time for destiny's roll call. Chains and courtesy fail next. Fenrir snaps what could not be snapped, because that was always the fine print, and Jörmungandr rises to breathe venom into sky and sea like a storm with a memory. Loki wriggles free of punishment's knots, gathers the far bitter and the near resentful, and sets his face toward the field where explanations retire. Garm breaks loose at Nipperhella. The barking at the threshold turned into a red note you can feel in your teeth. Heimdall lifts Gjallarhorn, and the sound arrives everywhere at once, as if distance had been cancelled for the day, and Bifrost groans under what must pass before it breaks like brave glass. Naglfar, the ship built from the uncut nails of the dead, floats free because people forgot their tidiness, and fate remembered its boat-building skills. Across a sea deciding to be final, the hosts row with grim professionalism toward a horizon that doesn't blink. On the plain of Vigrider, the air is full of old business finally collecting its signatures, and matches are set like runes that have waited too long to be read aloud. Odin meets Fenrir, and is swallowed, the way a sentence sometimes needs a dark vowel to sound complete. Vidar answers with the quiet efficiency of revenge that isn't about noise, tearing the wolf to stillness with a boot and a grip, meant for this exact day. Thor finds the serpent, strikes, and wins the kind of victory that lets him take only 9 steps before poison teaches him what even thunder must learn, which is how to be done. Freyr faces Surt with warmth where a sword used to be, and falls in a blaze his harvest can't extinguish, a cost paid long ago for love that did not apologize. Tyr and Garm go down tangled together, and Heimdall and Loki trade final blows that look like a door shutting from both sides at once. Then the last sentences of the age read themselves aloud. Surtur's fire blooms like a red forest, stars slip, and the earth sinks beneath a sea that washes the chalkboard clean without asking for extra credit. There is a silence after that, not empty, only resting with its eyes closed, counting to a number only trees remember, and then the light returns the way a good idea does. calmly, convincingly with green in its pocket. From the wood called Hodmimis Holt, two humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, step out like a soft answer, hunger replaced with dew and a to-do list that starts with breakfast and gratitude. The sun's daughter takes her mother's path, proving day can inherit itself without losing the family resemblance, and fields give grain without waiting for plough or praise. Surviving gods gather, Vidar and Vali, and Magni and Modi carrying Mjolnir like a practical memory, and Balder returns with Hoda, reconciliation walking on 2 feet. There will be halls again, including one that shines like honesty burnished, Gimle, where those who kept their promises sit with the weather in their favour and a long view that doesn't flinch. The runes still mean what they mean, even when retold, and the wells still keep their cool under new leaves, because continuity is the quietest magic. What ended was an era. What begins is a morning, and mornings are best entered with soft steps and a willingness to be surprised by how kind sunlight can be. So let inevitability unwind into acceptance, and acceptance into rest, like a long braid coming loose at day's end without tangles or hurry, only relief. The future has already done the hard part of arriving. Your job is smaller and sweeter. Breathe, turn the page, and let the new green have the floor for a while. When sleep comes, let it be the kind that believes in afters because the story does too, and it has practice. When Ragnarok came, bonds broke and oaths were collected. Thor met the serpent, Odin met the wolf, fire met wind, and the world exhaled too hard. It wasn't an end so much as a hard reset. Let the crackle fade to embers. Gjallarhorn sounded, and the note arrived everywhere at once, like distance had taken the night off. Bifrost strained, then shattered under marching fire, a brave bridge concluding its shift with honourable splinters. Naglfar slid from its moorings, nails of the dead made seaworthy by long neglect and grim efficiency. Across the heaving dark, the far hosts rode toward Vigrider, a plain with room for every old argument. Odin spurred forward beneath a sky busy with omens, spear bright as a last good idea. Fenrir came enormous and hungry, the horizon tucked inside his jaw like a polite napkin. The All-Father vanished between those teeth, a sentence ending without a period because the mouth had swallowed the ink. Vidar stepped in with a silence sharp enough to cut fate, prying the wolf apart and finishing what vengeance writes in block letters. Thor and Jörmungandr met, where the sea remembered being colder, hook and hammer replaced by inevitability and noise. He struck, the serpent fell, and poison climbed him like a verdict with excellent lungs. Thor took 9 steps, each a drumbeat you could walk inside, then dropped into the hush he had earned. Even thunder has to rest when the sky is done speaking for the day. Freyr faced Surtur, warmth versus furnace, the field bright with terrible confidence. Without his self-fighting sword, Love's earlier purchase came due, and the fire giant wrote his name across the horizon in orange. Where grain had learned its manners, ash rehearsed a new etiquette, drifting in thoughtful sheets. Some prices are paid exactly once and still echo like a corridor of doors. Elsewhere, Tyr grappled Garm, 2 guardians closing accounts together, each holding the other's last breath gently and firmly. Heimdall met Loki, watchman against trickster, and the balance corrected itself in the oldest possible way. Both fell, and the arithmetic finally believed it. Spears asked their last questions, and shields gave their last answers, and the wind learned every name before setting them down carefully. If courage ever needed a definition, the ground at Vigrider provided multiple acceptable spellings. Then Surtur lifted his sword and drew a line through the weather, a red geometry no one could argue with. Stars slipped, timber sighed, and the world burned like a book that insisted its story continue by other means. The earth sank, the sea closed, and the last light wrote itself large and then politely exited. The noise ended, and the silence arrived like a professional, capable, unhurried, complete. In that quiet, embers held on with tidy pride, small suns refusing to be dramatic about their usefulness. Ash fell in soft handwriting, labelling the day finished without making a fuss about it. What survived waited without fanfare, because survival is not a speech, It is a posture learned by patient backs. The air cooled as if the forge had set its tools down and stepped outside to think. From far roots and deep shelves, memory did its inventory and found enough to begin again later, when the dark had slept. Names that still had work to do stood quietly in the wings, not crowding the stage they would repair. Some carried a hammer's echo, some a boot unstained by wolf, all of them holding their breath in the new polite dark. Even endings tidy their corners when tomorrow might visit early. So let your shoulders lower with the smoke, the way rafters relax after a long, hot story. The battle has clocked out, the shields are finally off duty, and the spears have learned the benefits of being sticks again. Embers blink like thoughtful eyes and decide to keep watch until green is ready to speak. For now, rest where the crackle has softened, and the ashes glow just enough to guide your breathing in and out. From ash and ocean, a green world rose like a shy smile. 2 humans woke in the dew with nothing but each other and breakfast to figure out. The sun had a daughter, hope had hands. Inhale the gentlest kind of beginning. The earth lifted itself from the water as if remembering an old routine, wringing out the smoke and smoothing its hair with a breeze that had finally decided to behave. Crops promised to sprout without being asked, a quiet apology from the soil for all the shouting earlier. Rivers stitched silver seams across the new green and the horizon unclenched. From a hidden thicket called Hodmimis Holt, 2 people stepped into the morning, Lif and Lifthrasir, blinking at a world that looked back kindly. They had dew for breakfast and patience for lunch, which is exactly the right diet for starting over. There were no instructions besides keep going, which is the best and only kind that lasts. Overhead, the sun's daughter took her mother's path, lighting the day with practiced warmth and an understanding of timing that felt like a gift. Daylight arrived on schedule, a new supervisor with a familiar smile and a clean clipboard. Shadows remembered how to be helpful rather than dramatic, and the breeze filed its reports in lowercase. Across the renewed plain of Idavölla, surviving gods gathered like craftsmen at a rebuilt workshop, checking tools and telling the kind of jokes that mean, we're still here. Vidar stood in quiet strength and Vali with him, each carrying a silence that had learned to be useful. Magni and Modi arrived with Mjolnir, the hammer now an heirloom with a firm handshake and no appetite for grandstanding. From Hell's halls, Baldur returned with Herder, reconciliation walking with its arm around regret, both of them a little shy and entirely sincere. Their presence felt like an open window, and the house of the world breathed easier. Grief didn't vanish, but it sat down politely and let joy speak first for once. New halls rose where old stories had rested, including Gimle, a bright dwelling for those whose word and work had the same shape in daylight. It shone without squinting, the kind of light you can read by and sleep near, which is not easy to find or keep. Around it, the ground remembered how to be generous without asking for applause. On this morning, no one hurried the runes. They still meant what they meant, and that was enough. The wells remained cool under the trees' patient roots, because continuity is a polite miracle that refuses to brag. Even the distant edges of the world agreed to keep their voices down while the centre found its feet. Lif and Lifthrasir walked the slope of a small hill and practiced naming things again. Stone, stream, seed, home. Each word a key that turned without squeaking. They learned how to split a task into 2 chairs, how to cook with gratitude, and how to sleep without guarding the door. Between them grew the comforting arithmetic of we, which survives every calendar change worth speaking of. The gods did not pretend the past had been tidy, but they agreed to make the future kinder by design rather than accident. Plans were smaller and better that way. Fix the bridge, tend the fields, listen before lifting the heavy things. When the sun climbed, no one applauded. They nodded, which is what acceptance does when it sits up straight. Time put on a softer jacket and started walking, content to mark seasons rather than declare emergencies. Winter promised to be crisp and not cruel, summer bright and not boastful, spring and autumn as courteous as handshakes. The sky set its calendar to reasonable, and the wind co-signed. By evening there were paths where feet preferred to go, and grasses with the good sense to be comfortable under new names. Stars peeked out like old friends who had rehearsed their lines and left the drama backstage. Night arrived on time, took off its shoes, and did not wake the house. If this sounds simple, let it, because simplicity is just excellence with its sleeves rolled up. The new world didn't need to be louder to be better. It needed to be gentler to be true. Some mornings are earned by the people who learned how to keep them, so breathe with the new trees, slow in, slower out, and let the dew cool your thoughts the way it cooled their breakfast. Feel the light find your shoulders without asking for anything tricky in return. Sleep knows this place and will show you around. All you have to do is follow the softest path forward. These tales warmed longhouses, guided sailors, and explained why the world feels like a beautiful mess. Warriors trained with jokes sharper than axes, and poets turned mead into memory foam for the soul. The myths kept people company in the honest dark. Settle back. This is how stories hold us while we sleep. Picture winter inside a timbered longhouse, where the smoke curls politely to the rafters, and a scold's voice threads through firelight as neighbours lean in close to share warmth and wonder. Stories here are social glue and survival tech, assigning meaning to weather, luck, and the way bread rises better on some days than others. When the punchlines arrive, they land with the comfort of a familiar tool in a ready hand. Myth was not a separate shelf. It was the shelving, the structure that stored a whole world view from root to star. Yggdrasil and the 9 worlds gave people a mental map for daily choices, a way to understand why boundaries matter and why they sometimes blur at the edges. Cosmology wasn't small talk. It was the diagram under every decision. Rituals brought that map to life with timing and intention, from seasonal blots to quiet offerings at groves and hearths when the year changed keys. Festivals like Yule mark the hinge of winter, turning endurance into celebration and reminding everyone the sun knows how to come back on its own schedule. Sacred acts made the community visible to itself and legible to the gods. Ancestor veneration folded the living and the dead into one sturdy household, with mounds and grave goods treated as addresses rather than endings. People poured ale, left food, and asked protection of those who still mattered, by memory and by presence just across the threshold. Care for the departed doubled as care for crops, health, and the luck of the roof over your head. Law and story met at assemblies where oaths were spoken under open sky and consequences had names everyone already knew. Right action wasn't abstract. It echoed through kin lines, trade routes, and the way you showed up in a storm with the right rope and no excuses. Narratives about honor were training manuals disguised as entertainment. For warriors, the promise of Valhalla or Freya's Folkvanger made courage a reasonable investment, rather than a luxury brand, and living bravely felt like sound accounting. The Valkyries' choices made death less random and more like draft orders for a second career, with better mead breaks. Even those who stayed home knew the war stories, so they could read returning faces with care. Farmers listened for Freya in the rain's manners, and for Freya in the kindly tilt of the soil, because fertility is a conversation, not a demand. Ploughs moved in straight lines because hope does, and the barn's success was part harvest, part harmony, with powers that prefer gratitude in full sentences. A good yield proved the contract between people and landscape had been worded well this season. At sea, Njord owned the good days, and Thor handled the bad moments, and both appreciated offerings that smelled like sincerity more than show. Navigation needed stars, nerve, and a story steady enough to keep hands calm when the sky tried new noises. Even the weekday names carried a quiet procession of gods across calendars: Tyr's Day, Odin's Day, Thor's Day, and Frigg or Freya's Day, because memory loves repetition. Mead Hall performances were elastic, serious enough to carry lore and lore, playful enough to turn anxiety into applause and advice. A skald's craft made ancestors audible and futures plausible, translating weather into wisdom and quarrels into case studies with jokes. The cup went round so words could go further than one throat at a time. Ritual violence and sacrifice were part of the fabric too, sober, structured, and aimed at maintaining balance with beings who dislike unpaid debts. No one pretended the world was gentle. They insisted it be understandable and fair enough to live in with dignity. Meaning was the real harvest, with barley as its sturdy sidekick. Even Ragnarok served as a stoic bedtime story, teaching how to stand straight in a stiff wind and still set aside seed for spring. The end was not the point so much as the posture. Do your work, honour your word, repair what breaks, and teach the children where the good knives live. Tomorrow belongs to people who can carry a log and a song at the same time. So if the longhouse dims and the coals breathe red, the old tales still fit like well-made boots, useful, warm, and keen on walking you home. Let them guide your keel, steady your hand, and put names to the weather inside your chest until it turns friendly again. Sleep now. The myths will keep watch, and the mead hall of your mind knows the way to morning by heart.